Thank you for coming to ADA's first Zoom meeting. And tonight we have a guest speaker, Jane Boyle, who's going to speak to us about Alzheimer's, in particular, this horrible disease. Also, I think it's important Jane can speak to us about the caregivers who really need a great deal of help, and not as the patient does. Later on, we're going to be open for questions. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to call in. John will be handling that for us. I'd like to introduce everybody. I'm Pat Wan, Councilwoman here in Belmar. And if my committee, you want to start with Mary Louise, affectionately known as Louie. Louie Anderson, if you'd like to introduce yourself as long as the rest of our committee, please.
Okay, I'm Louie Anderson. I've been on the...
Is Claire on?
Yes, Claire's there.
Not sure why, but I'm here.
You're there. I'm Louie. I've been on the committee. I also work at the Ark of Monmouth, have for 32 years. And I'm the local first aid squad, and here I am.
Thank you, Louie.
Sure.
Joanne, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hi, everybody. I'm Joanne. I'm on the committee also. I work with Carol Ann for the Circle of Friends. And I've been on the committee for about 5 years now. That's about it for me. I'm retired teacher.
Okay, is Claire Dykey, are you there?
No.
No, she's not there. Linda Sharkus?
Hi, I've been a member of the ADA for, this is my second year. My mother had dementia and she passed away at 91 last year. So I had a lot of experience being a caretaker and being involved in her last years of life.
Thank you, Linda. Okay, we'd like to start with our guest speaker, Jane Boyle from Family Support. She's going to speak to us on the disease. Jane, would you like to begin?
Thank you. I am going to, I have a screen I'm going to share, so bear with me just a second while I put it up. I actually have two things I'm going to share, so let me see if I can do this correctly. There we go. I hope you can all see that. Oops. I lost you.
Pat, you're muted.
Yeah, I muted everyone, late so it doesn't go back and forth. But Jane, it looks good on our end. I think you can go for it.
Yep, I'm sorry, I'm unable to see it. I'm going to stop the share.
Okay.
And let me try it one more time. I just have a little brochure I want to just kind of share with everybody to see.
You want the color?
Wait. So I hope you can see that. Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Jane Boyle, and I am here tonight as it was just mentioned, someone who had been a caregiver, and subsequent to that, I've with an amazing advanced practice nurse who has devoted her career to the special needs community. Her name is Leone Murphy. Leone Murphy and I began, and you must know her from the ARC, began something called the New Jersey Down Syndrome and Alzheimer's Family Support Group. We have been in operation about 2 years. This is purely voluntary, and it has grown out of a need for information and for support for families dealing with both Down syndrome and Alzheimer's disease. And over the past 2 years, we've grown to, we have almost 90 families now across the state of New Jersey who have a loved one with Down syndrome and who are in some stage of the the potential process of Alzheimer's disease. We have a number of people who, like myself, have lost their loved one to Alzheimer's disease. We have others who are in the midst of that journey, and others still who are concerned about what the future might hold for their loved one with Down syndrome. So I would be remiss if I did not begin by thanking Carol, not only for the invitation to share some information with you tonight, but for also the amazing work that she and her family and her friends do for the special needs community. It's just remarkable what her good work has added to the quality of life for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities here in Southern Monmouth County is just wonderful. My sister, Ellen, who is pictured in this little slide, Ellen looked forward to and loved every dance she ever went to, every prom, every golf outing. And we have Carol and her family to thank for the richness and the fun and the joy that those experiences were. And we thank Belmar for hosting so many of them, and particularly pre-Sandy when we were in the pavilion. Post-Sandy, we went to the gym, and then eventually back up to the new Taylor Pavilion. So what a wonderful, welcoming community. And so thank you. Thank you all for that, and for all that you're doing for this really amazing community. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about Down syndrome and Alzheimer's disease, and sort of start to put Alzheimer's slightly in some perspective. I'm not a scientist, so I'm not really qualified to give you any medical information about what do you do about Alzheimer's disease, but I read a lot and I research a lot, and I've been deeply ingrained in this now for a number of years. And what I really have to share with you is personal experience. So in this world, I just pulled something that was done by the Gates Foundation this afternoon, just to kind of give you some context for Alzheimer's disease. It's called the Global Burden of Disease Study. And the Gates Foundation, gathered data from all over the world. And, shockingly, painfully, they report that from 1990 to 2016, not that long a period of time in history, the number of Alzheimer's cases has doubled, more than doubled. So in 1990, there were about 20 million cases of Alzheimer's disease recognized worldwide. And by 2016, that was up to 44 million. And in that year, in 2016, with almost 400,000 deaths from Alzheimer's disease. The point is, it's a growing public health issue and concern. And, we live in a world where, for those of us who are so-called normally developing, we worry about Alzheimer's for ourselves. The lovely woman who just said she cared for her mother and her mother passed away. Anymore, people, you always know there's a real story out there of somebody whose family member has gone through it. What I know the most about and have lived the most about is what happens to people with Down syndrome and Alzheimer's disease. So I'm looking around the room tonight, and I think the people who study this stuff would tell us that if any of us who are normally developing are diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, it's probably going to happen to us sometime in our 60s, maybe in our 60s, maybe in our 70s, becomes much more likely in our 80s. And maybe somewhere between 5 and 15% of us will experience this. And when that happens, when they study these things, from diagnosis to death, maybe from 5 to 12 years. My sister Ellen was the light of my life and the joy of our family. When she was born in 1965 with Down syndrome, the life expectancy for a person born with Down syndrome, we were told, was somewhere between 21 and 25 years of age. And that was in 1965. That remained true for people with Down syndrome well into the 1980s, thanks to better health care, to even things that we take for granted, antibiotic treatment of the respiratory problems that they have, better heart, cardiac care, but just better health care, not living in institutions as they did. When Ellen was born in 1965, that was almost a year that was a demarcation between when people at birth would be automatically sent to live in an institution for life or go home to live in a community. So all these things have contributed to an increase in life expectancy for people with Down syndrome. Today, the life expectancy for a person born with Down syndrome is 61 years of age. So when my sister Ellen was born, it was believed that her life would be around in her 20s. That is also to say that it was not yet known what happened to people with Down syndrome as they age, because they simply didn't age long enough, like we did, to sort of understand and see what happens to them as they age. Sadly, what we have learned, and principally we've learned this over the last 8 to 10 years, is that adults with Down syndrome are at highly increased risk of Alzheimer's disease as they grow older. Alzheimer's is not inevitable. There are many possible other issues to consider when concerns about memory or behavior arise. So it's very important to take a really thoughtful approach to this. But what we've learned is that there is a genetic connection between Down syndrome and Alzheimer's disease. Some of us are of the age that we will remember back in the 1970s when Richard Nixon was president in 1972. And he declared war on cancer. And it was like a wonderful, wonderful thing that he did. And America took the lead through the National Institutes of Health, the National Cancer Institute, in studying cancer. And today in 2020, there have been such amazing advancements that cancer itself is not a death sentence any longer. Well, similarly, in a similar approach, when President Obama was newly in office, he declared war on Alzheimer's disease. And as a result, through the National Institutes of Health, through major federal funding of research programs across the nation, and principally in some of the Columbia University in New York is one of the major study centers, Mass General up in Massachusetts, it's one, there's a few out in California. They started to study Alzheimer's, not only because it's going to affect so many of us as we age, but thanks to a group of doctors and nurses, including Leon Murphy, they started to study especially what was going to happen to people with Down syndrome as they aged, because they started to suspect that the incidence and the prevalence of Alzheimer's among these wonderful folks was much greater than it was in the normal population. What they've learned is that genetically, Down syndrome is a third copy of gene number 21. And that's what makes a person with Down syndrome a person with Down syndrome. And it turns out that over these last recent years that they've really been studying this, they've learned that that gene number 21, is the gene that manufactures the plaque and the tangles that become Alzheimer's disease. And Alzheimer's disease, as one form of dementia, is actually an organic process whereby the amyloid protein creates plaque entangles that actually change the brain, and the brain which controls all of our functions, from speech and sight to ambulation and swallowing, and the list goes on and on. So our brothers and sisters, our sons and daughters, our friends with Down syndrome have had this gene number 21 manufacturing this stuff from the day, from the time they were conceived. So by the time they are in their 40s, folks with Down syndrome are, the science tells us that 100% of them have the presence of plaque entangles. It doesn't mean that 100% of them will get Alzheimer's disease, but they all have it. And as they age beyond their 40s, we start to see the prevalence and the onset of Alzheimer's disease. In my sister's case, my sister was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease at age 50. Ellen and I lived together. After my mother died, we lived together. We lived together for about 8 years. And I always like to say about Ellen, she was the poster child. I'm going to show you a picture of her. Ellen was the poster child for Down syndrome. She had a wonderful life. She graduated from high school at age 21. She went on to work for about 20 years. She was successfully employed, and it was a part-time employment, but she worked in McDonald's out on Route 35. She worked at the Sea Girt Motor Lodge with with a friend of hers, and they ran the laundry there for about 10 years. She went on to an adult day program. All the while, she was incredibly engaged in things like Special Olympics and social activities. And, I always felt she lit up the room when she walked in. At age 50, she started to have behavioral problems, the likes of which we had never, ever witnessed with her before. And these changed her, and they were very, very difficult to understand. And it was very, very difficult to find knowledgeable practitioners who understood anything about Down syndrome and Alzheimer's disease. At 50 years old, frankly, what they did was many practitioners, and there are very few who really have an expertise in the disability community, the intellectual and developmental disability community. But there are a few. But the behavioral issues would be very confused with an onset of some psychiatric illness. That's not what it was at all. It would be minimized, these kind of issues would be minimized and confused with what they used to call just the mental retardation. And so it was very, so getting a diagnosis for a person with Down syndrome has added complications because it can easily be confused with other things, but really important to get the correct diagnosis. In Ellen's case, Ellen was diagnosed at age 50, and she died at age 52 of the complications of end-stage Alzheimer's disease. For her and for many of the other families with whom we work, we found that the progression of Alzheimer's disease was rapid compared to what happens in the normally developing population. And I have heard from others and from some of the people who were studying this, that while a normally developing person might, the course of the disease might be 5 to 12 years, for people with Down syndrome, it could be 2 to 4 years. So the declines are much more rapid. They're much more severe. They come very quickly. And the other thing we learned in the process, and Ellen stayed at home until her final breath. At first, she stayed in the day program. We were very fortunate here at the Jersey Shore to live between New York and Philadelphia, where some of the few people in the nation who really understand Down syndrome and Alzheimer's disease are. And they could help me to understand what was, most importantly, what was really happening with her, and then be able to plan from there what for her care. A very, very important aspect of this, because she was, the way I think about it now is that in her case, she was at the leading edge of those to this age to be able to
Hold on.
in this case, her, through end of life care. Lots and lots of elements of it, and I don't want to go on for too much longer because we said about 15 minutes. Ellen stayed home. Ellen stayed in her day program as long as she could. When she could no longer do that, she stayed at home. Hospice came in to care for her at home. She began to experience all the kind of end stage of Alzheimer's realities. And, and she died actually peacefully at home with a pulse. Let's take a quick second to talk about what a pulse is. Physician's or practitioner's order for life-sustaining treatment. In my journey with her on this, one of the things I learned along the way was that people, as they approach end-stage Alzheimer's disease, will be at great risk for losing the ability to swallow, which of course has implications for eating and nourishment, and breathing. And this leads me to tell you how we formed the New Jersey Down Syndrome and Alzheimer's Support Group. I was Ellen's legal guardian, and legal guardianship, the fact that I was her legal guardian, was a crucial importance in this, in order to have the authority to make the healthcare decisions on her behalf. Just put that out there as a, put in the back of your mind. I know the whole subject of guardianship has evolved over the years, and a lot of the current thinking about guardianship is that guardianship is something that, we want to encourage independence and self-determination and self-decision making among our loved ones with Down syndrome and other intellectual and developmental disabilities. In my experience with my sister, the fact that I was her legal guardian through the experience of Alzheimer's disease was an enormous plus, because she, of course, could not give informed consent for any of the decisions that were made. And I believe that the decisions to support her through as gentle and humane an ending were were surely the right thing for her. Through my work with the state, in what we've done across the state, we've now come across numerous examples of our beloved ones are having very, very, just very, very different experiences than that. And very painful to watch and to experience, and principally for them. So after Ellen died, Leon Murphy and I had been talked a lot about the fact that how can we, there was nothing. There was a national group that was beginning to talk about Down syndrome and Alzheimer's disease, and the supports that families needed and information that they needed, because there are a lot of things about how Alzheimer's presents in Down syndrome that are different than how it presents in the normally aging population. So we couldn't get any traction getting started until there was a front page story on the Asbury Park Press back 2 years ago in January. And it was the story of a woman who had a brother with Down syndrome, who lived in a group home, and the brother had a fall, or he had something that brought him to the emergency room. And he probably had the fall because that was one of the things that happened through his own, it was really an indicator of what was happening with Alzheimer's with him. But the Alzheimer's had yet to be diagnosed. He ends up in the emergency room, actually at Community Medical Center in Toms River. The protocol there, they follow their protocol, which is written for you and me. It's not written for these guys. And he ends up in the intensive care unit, and they have now given him a feeding tube and a respirator. And only after all this is done do they finally understand that what really has been happening with him is that he is experiencing some of the end stage aspects of Alzheimer's disease. So this is the story in the Asbury Park Press. It's front page above the fold, a picture of the sister standing over the brother in the intensive care unit. And it's the story, and the headline reads something like special athlete champion, in the final contest of his life. It is a heartbreaking beyond belief story because the sister now has to deal with issues that she didn't have guardianship. And this clearly was not what anyone wanted for him. And it was the decision to withdraw this life support and to let him die peacefully. So anyway, that was sorry, it was the front page. So Leon actually got in touch with the author of the story, Jerry Carino, who does wonderful human interest stories for the press. And we told him what we were trying to do and the sister had no idea who to reach or who to talk to. Nobody knew anything about Down syndrome and Alzheimer's disease. So anyway, Jerry agreed, and he did a follow-up story. And it was a story about our interest in reaching families who had a person aging with Down syndrome and who might want to meet other parents. As a society, we've done a marvelous job across the course of Ellen's lifetime in early intervention, in the educational system, in employment, in housing, in recreation, in athletics. The uncharted territory is these life-limiting diseases and end-of-life care. And Leon and I felt very strongly that we wanted to provide families a place where they could learn, number one, that they're not alone. And number two, where the resources that are now emerging about this, about caregiving, about strategies, and about support for our loved ones, they're only now being developed and evolving. So we wanted to provide a place. So the New Jersey Down Syndrome and Alzheimer's Disease Family Support was created as the first, and I think still the only, state-based family support initiative for this specific audience, for this specific group of families. And as across the nation, there was a group called the American Academy of Developmental Medicine and Dentistry. There are some physicians, Leon Murphy was a part of that. Dr. Seth Keller, a very well-known neurologist here in New Jersey, who specializes in Down syndrome and Alzheimer's, was one of the founders. These were the people who originally got the federal government to say, let's take a look also at Down syndrome when we're studying Alzheimer's. So these wonderful people said, great, you guys have come along. Let's start creating something on a state-by-state basis. So New Jersey is the first. Following the Asbury Park Press article, New Jersey Public Television picked up on it and did a 4-part series on aging and intellectual developmental disabilities, with one of the segments devoted to Down syndrome and Alzheimer's. So we've had about 80 families, as I say, across the state join us. We meet monthly. We've been doing it on Zoom since February. And we have, actually Zoom has been great because we've been able to invite in people from across the country. You know, doctors from California will come, and we offer what we'd like to think is like really good quality information, and you know, and then support. We've had 6 deaths over the last 2 years, and we have walked that road with our families. And you know, God love them one and all. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to tell you about Down syndrome and Alzheimer's disease, a very specific topic, but one that has far-reaching and profound effects on those who are affected by it. So thank you.
Thank you, Jane. What an extraordinary story that was. Really heart-wrenching. Also very, very educational. The combination of the Down syndrome and the Alzheimer's is a remarkable thing. Very touching. I have a question for you regarding guardianship.
Mm-hmm.
Am I on delay as usual?
Say again?
I'm always on delay, it seems. My computer internet isn't that great. Regarding guardianship, kind of maybe it's a silly question, maybe it's not. Do you have to have guardianship if your partner, your husband, is early stages of Alzheimer's? Well, it's not that bad yet. Do you need that to go forward to the end with them?
I'm going to perhaps recommend that you get one of your local attorneys to come in at some point and talk about it. But I will tell you what my understanding of guardianship is. And guardianship is a big deal because, you know, and maybe husbands and wives can sign for each other, and, you know, the laws that govern what the marriage contract is may give you some authority. But guardianship, particularly for people with Down syndrome or other intellectual and developmental disabilities, when you get guardianship, what you're doing is you go to court. It's very expensive. You have to go to court, and you have to go through a process of proving to a judge that the person who is the subject of the guardianship the language is horrible. It used to be even worse, but it's horrible. That they used to be called imbeciles. It's very, I forget what the modern language is, but they are incompetent. They are incapable of managing their own affairs. It's for most people, it is a wrenching, heartbreaking process. For the parents of people with Down syndrome or with any of the other intellectual developmental disabilities, it has a double whammy to it, because these are families who have spent every day of their lives encouraging the development of skills, of independence, of self-care, of whether it's going to work, preparing a meal, taking care of yourself. They like 50 years they've devoted every day to trying to help their person make gains. What guardianship requires of them to do is to stand before a judge, to get doctors to agree, and to even put at risk the fact that their person may have to sit in the witness chair and be called before the judge to be evaluated by the judge, where and I'm thinking of the example of a parent getting guardianship for an adult child once they're 21, to say, my son is incompetent, he's unable. It's like the defeat. It's what they have worked every moment of their lives against. So, and one of our parents who has told other people for years, yes, get guardianship, it's like a good investment, blah, blah, blah. So in the case that I think you're describing, so for our people, like in my sister's case, when my sister turned 21, my mother and father went to the court and they filed a guardianship petition. They hired a lawyer to do it. They went through the process. They had to get documentation they had to get 2 physicians to agree, and maybe even, 2 physicians to agree. They had to be willing to, if the judge wanted to call my sister into court and examine her to see if it was true. So they did. So the other thing is, in a will, for any of the special needs parents out there, you can't, like in your will, you can convey property to somebody. I leave my house too. You can't leave a person to somebody. So you can't in your will say, I want my son I don't want my daughter Jane to take Ellen. Upon my mother's death, I had to go to the court. Ellen didn't have to be declared incompetent again. She had that was never challenged again. But I had to go to court to petition the court to become the successor guardian. And that was, again, a process. It cost thousands of dollars. It cost time, but I did. I became Ellen's successor guardian. And I had to put myself before the court with whatever records they wanted to look at about me to see that I was a suitable guardian. And so in your case, where it's a spouse, I almost don't even want to venture into that, except to say, but I'd like to make one more point about guardianship, particularly with the special needs community. In Ellen's life, probably up until the last 2 or 3 years of her life, she would have been okay without guardianship. You could she could go to the doctor for a flu shot, for a routine something or other, or the dentist, or she could go on a trip or get on a plane. Nobody really questioned it. When a serious diagnosis like Alzheimer's disease is made, any conversation I had with a physician, and particularly when we got far enough down the road toward hospice care and going through the enrollment, being, going on a hospice service, I had to produce the guardianship paper every time, because Ellen was, in the eyes of the law, an adult. She was over 21. And had I not had that, I would have put her at risk that the New Jersey Bureau of Guardianship Services would have come in to take over as her guardian. So I'm just saying, I'm not saying it's going to, happen, but that was a very important protection. And this is a total editorial comment on my part, so please discard it if you are uncomfortable with it. But I know there is having gone through this profound experience, and now having seen many other families go through the same, there's there's kind of a movement to rethink guardianship for young people, when they, and it really only comes into play when you're 21. Young adults with IDD turn 21, and the issues really are, and they've come to the fore, that they want to live on their own. They want to make their own choices. They want to live on their own. Maybe they want a boyfriend or girlfriend, and they even want them to come and stay over at night. Shock. And that's like a hard pill for a lot of these parents to swallow. They don't think of their kids like that. So there's, or they want to pick this job over that job, or so there are certainly it's certainly a good conversation to have about the rights of people with IDD for for life, how they live their lives. I am influenced by these serious end of life concerns and protecting. And I will be the first to admit it, just my bias toward protection. So I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Jane, I'd like to jump in and ask you, could you take a few minutes to go over the symptoms and how they manifested themselves? Because you said the process was very short. Really appreciate hearing about that.
Oh, yes, thank you. So phase one was a little bit of forgetfulness. My sister was immaculately neat. She kept her room and her drawers and her stuff just the way she liked it. Every night she put her clothes out for the next morning. She had her routines, she'd come home, she'd turn on whatever her favorite show, Days of Our Lives. So, she really nailed life and did it very well. So things started to happen that were so out of character for her, but you don't think of it much at the time. So she had a phone. She loses her phone. She loses her phone one day. And that's and you're sort of annoyed with her. Like, how could you lose your phone? Because you don't lose your phone. She'd lose her phone. She'd start subtle little things like that. And I'm not suggesting that equals Alzheimer's in anybody, but in hindsight, these were early indicators. Behaviorally, and I think my friend Carol would nod when I say this, she was delightful. She would walk into a room. If she knew you, she would hug you. She would tell you how happy she was to see you. If it was a dance, she would be the first one out on the dance floor, dancing and enjoying herself. That started to change. She would go into an auditorium where the music was playing, and she would almost be acting out, no. So behaviorally, she started having this refusal behavior. No. We went to, for her 50th birthday, we took her on a vacation. And if you know people with Down syndrome, they live for their birthdays. And her birthday was October 3rd, so we would start planning on October 4th for her next birthday. So we started planning for a trip to her favorite destination. She loved to go to Bermuda, imagine. So my sister and her husband made plans to take Ellen and me to Bermuda for Ellen's birthday. So in January, every day we talk about going to Bermuda. And she would say things like, my trip is coming up so fast. I can't wait. What am I going to wear? What am I going to pack? We're going to blah, 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 blah. That's what we did. The day of the trip came, we get to Newark Airport. We walk into Newark Airport. I mean, picture it. We can handle this, right? Lights, camera, action. She melted down. And that's an indicator of Alzheimer's. The sensory stimulation that we normally just handle, right? We adapt. She was unable to. It was such a sensory overload. The trip was a disaster. We stay in this nice place, and we had a little cottage. But there's a beach, there's still a lot of stuff to do. All she could do was there was a little table on the patio with her coloring book and crayon, and either my sister Mary or myself sitting with her. It was just too much. And we thought she was being difficult. Downs people can be stubborn. And we were like, what's wrong? And, you want to get, so that was a big indicator. Behaviorally, it was so different. So we got home and I started the search because something was off. I started the search for what was going on. She took a day, a little van picked her up to go to the day program. And she would be like she would be up, dressed in the morning, ready to go at the door, looking for the van. Now it was a big issue to just get her from the kitchen table to the back door. We'd get to the van and she would start screaming at the top of her lungs, no, no, no. So the fear was, what's going on at the program? Is something terrible happened? So I ran down all those things and I learned something really, really fascinating from some people at Thomas Jefferson University Medical Center in Philadelphia. And they nailed this. They sort of deconstructed what was happening getting on the van, because getting on the van every day became a nightmare. So what they deconstructed was that when you suffer from Alzheimer's, and this was a rapid decline compared to what would happen to us. And this seemed like it happened overnight. I mean, and overnight might have been a month or two. When we'd go out to the curb and the street is black, right? Blacktop, asphalt. The van is there and the van has like 3 steps you have to get up. And it's that black rubber stuff on the steps. When you have Alzheimer's disease, you lose depth perception. That's a part of the brain that goes. So when she was looking at the street and then the steps, to her, it was like falling into an abyss. And it was terrifying. So that was why she wouldn't get on the van. And one of the solutions to that, and all these solutions worked for a little while. One of the solutions was to get that safety tape, that black and orange striped tape, and put it on the steps. And we went through unbelievable hurdles to get them to pull the van into the driveway where it was concrete and there was better contrast for her. So that was like, anything that had to do with stimulation, with depth perception, became like she lost all of that. So living became very difficult. She eventually lost, the same thing happened in the bathroom. There's white tile on our bathroom floor and all white did the same thing. So the day came that she could no longer walk over the threshold from a wood floor onto a white tile floor because it terrified her. And so, this person who had easily had been able to manage her own needs, toileting, bathing, and all that, that all went away. She started to have problems at the day program. I started to get the phone calls. Ellen won't go out with the group. Or should they go, or even more they would go out, they'd go out and do like activities during the day. They would go out and she wouldn't get back on the van to come back home, come back to their center. So I've become so passionate about this because I have seen where that's happened to other people and other people with Downs, and they jump to the conclusion that it's a psychiatric issue. And when they jump to the conclusion that it's a psychiatric issue, and a bit more difficult to diagnose the psychiatric stuff with our folks, they start administering the psychiatric drugs. And when the psychiatric drugs do not work, and they will not work when Alzheimer's is the underlying disease, because they're not treating the thing that's what's going on, they just up the dosages, waiting to get to the right therapeutic dosage. So we have people running around, I don't mean to say it like that, but we have people who are being treated inappropriately, and it is making their lives much, much worse, much, much worse. And so getting the right diagnosis is so important. So those were some of the early indicators. Eventually what happened, and I hope does that answer your question for at least early indicators?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, it is kind of interesting to hear somebody else's perception of what was going on. Because my mother didn't follow, as I looked at other people at Sunnyside, she was there for 3 years. Her symptoms manifested quite differently from what you described. She loved the social events. She never had that fear. She was frustrated when people wouldn't talk to her because she lost her ability to speak. But yet you knew she was trying, and like, see tears coming down her eyes because she was sad that she wasn't included. And I think that's something many people don't realize is a problem when people become nonverbal, is that it's not that they choose not to participate, they just can't. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Linda, very much.
Ladies, we have some hands.
Can we take some questions? If there's any out there?
Yeah, we have a hand from Vicky. Hold on, please.
Okay.
Vicky, is your hand up to?
My hand is up. I couldn't figure out how to unmute, but it came up on the screen.
Yep, just took care of you. Yep.
So those are the early symptoms. I have two questions for you. What are the later symptoms and the last symptoms that you saw? And what medical facilities other than Thomas Jefferson University and other doctors are available for people with Alzheimer's and Down syndrome? So it's two different questions.
So yes, so to the first question about the continuing symptoms. So eventually, my sister lost the ability to walk, to speak, to swallow, and those are kind of, I've heard that over and over again, classic symptoms. She actually, with Down syndrome, I've heard this from every Down syndrome family has said the same thing. My sister was a person who loved the water. She was a great swimmer. She was a butterfly swimmer. She loved, those long, long showers, anything water she loved. Water became torture to her. So I had a woman who helped me, and we would try to put her in the shower. Incontinence, both urinary and fecal. So we were freaked out not to allow a breakdown of her skin, to keep her skin clean, to not add to the problem. So we were always just trying to make sure she was clean. So we would get her in the shower, and the water would touch her hand. She would scream at the top of her lungs. No, I hate you. And for some reason, and I've had this validated by others, our people tend to really struggle. Now, struggle doesn't even begin to describe it, but when you with all the different techniques. So I actually became a certified dementia capable caregiver during this, just to learn what to do. And, they give you techniques like start at the feet, to get a handheld thing, start at the feet, work your way up, and all these things work like a couple times. But eventually she became bedbound, and, and things just became very quiet. One of the other changes that took place for her, and it was the continuing cognitive decline. So she had been, for example, a big Yankee fan, and she had shows that she loved, and we had all the like High School Musical and all those kinds of any of these music shows, and she would watch it. And what happened? She just lost all of that over time. It was subtle. It certainly wasn't any physical pain to her. But she went toward the end, she had coloring books. She always was coloring something. And that became just, eventually she would just hold the crayon in her hand. or a pack of cards, and she just held the card in her hand. And, you know, so there was that kind of diminishment, certainly diminishment of interest, but the other stuff, you know, and then eventually she had difficulty breathing. And at the end, you know, that was really just what happens. You know, I mean, it's so awful to talk about, but it's so real. You know, the brain controls every one of these functions. And as Alzheimer's just kind of slowly takes away each little part of the brain,
Mm-hmm.
that's what, you know, that's what happens. It's just shutting things down. So Ellen never went on a feeding tube. She never went on a respirator. You know, I think frankly, the hardest part of all of this, as her guardian, her sister, her sidekick, her number one cheerleader, was to accept what the reality of Alzheimer's disease was. That it is early on, she was put on Aricept, which is the Alzheimer's drug. Dementia is something that potentiates that, I think. There's a couple things that they offer. They've learned, they're not seeing that helps people with Downs. So it you know, you know, there's nothing good about the story. The challenge personally for me was to accept the reality of what was happening and to try to navigate this in a way that was the most loving and the least harmful to her. I will add two things. So there's a document in the state of New Jersey called the Pulse. I mentioned it earlier. Practitioner's Order for Life-Sustaining Treatment. And to the woman who asked about her husband, just FYI. So the New Jersey legislature, it's now maybe 5 years ago, did a very good thing. And they enacted legislation that created this thing called Practitioner's Order for Life-Sustaining Treatment. It is my explanation, nobody else's. It is advanced directives on steroids. What makes it so important is that it is actually a pre-written physician's order. And I spent my career in and around the healthcare system. So anybody who knows the healthcare system knows that what drives the whole system is a physician's order. You know, a physician writes the order for something, and that's it. So if any of us fill out, you know, like an advanced directive or one of those things, that's kind of our wishes, and that's kind of, you know, it's got to be interpreted under whatever conditions. A POST is a physician's order that stays in the patient's chart. And so when something happens, those are the orders that are followed. In my case, in Ellen's case, about a year before she died, when it was clear what was happening, the diagnosis had been made, I was very fortunate to have physicians with whom I could speak really candidly, and they helped me really understand what was going to happen. And I had guardianship, so I could do this. I have two other siblings. My physician said to me, talk to them, just to make sure we were on the same page so there wasn't any issues down the line. And so the physician and I had a very candid discussion about the course of the disease. And we wrote orders. He wrote orders for her that became part of her chart. And the goal of her care was comfort at home. And that drove everything that happened for her after that. And it was, and we did that at a time when we were not in a hair on fire place of oh my God, what are we going to do today? But we really tried to be thoughtful and prepared. And I'm very grateful that we did that, because and anyway, it was just very much in our case the right thing to do for Ellen.
Thank
So,
you, Jane, very much. John, is there anyone else out there with a question?
Yes.
Vicki, didn't you have the second part on that one?
Yes, I did. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay.
So,
Okay. The second part was other doctors other than and medical facilities other than Thomas Jefferson that you have found help with Down syndrome and Alzheimer's.
So they are few and far between. There is this Dr. Seth Keller, and I can make available a list that I have if you want me to share
Yes.
later. There's a physician up in Massachusetts. I know a couple people from New Jersey who actually go up there. There's somebody out in Chicago. And thank God for Zoom and the technology, we've been able to connect. I would also refer you to the National Down Syndrome Society. They published last year, for the first time ever, a caregiver's guide for Down syndrome and Alzheimer's disease. You can find it on their website. You have to noodle around with the navigation a little bit to find it. It's an amazing. They actually, I got the great honor of being one. I did participate in writing it, but in reviewing the pre-publication drafts and commenting. So there's 2 pictures of Ellen in there, which is very, very touching. Or I can send you links if somebody wants to send me email addresses. I'll be glad to follow up. But in New Jersey, there's a behaviorist out in California. Thanks to the technology, we can connect with some of these people. The National Down Syndrome Society has now for 3 years, for the first time ever, done an annual adult summit, which is a conference. They did it virtually this year. And a lot of these practitioners who practice across the country and have an interest in Downs and Alzheimer's are the presenters. So, and they're going to do it again this year, and they're going to do it virtually too. So we have access to those. And Dr. Seth Keller, who's down out on the New Jersey side, outside of Philadelphia, at Columbia University, there's a wonderful researcher there by the name of Dr. Nicole Schupf, who is actually actively doing research right now. And 4 or 5 of our support group families are participating in the research, and they're studying Down syndrome and Alzheimer's. So if that helps, I'll be happy to follow up.
Could we have your email address?
Sure. It's JaneMboyle@AOL.com.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Vicki. And
John,
any
anybody
hands?
else out there?
If any of our attendees, you can just raise your hand and I can come call on you and you can speak. Or if any of the ladies on the dais here want to raise their hand for a question, I can unmute you as well and you can speak. We'll give it a second. Oh yes, hold on. Let's see if we can hear you. You have to unmute. Let's see. No. Oh, there you are. There you are. Go ahead. Can you hear me?
Okay. Jane, what were the doctors that helped Ellen most that you could refer to us and some of the parents watching or even or listening?
So there is a board certified neurologist by the name of Dr. Seth Keller, who practices in Lumberton, New Jersey. He's internationally recognized. He happens to be here in New Jersey. And his practice is Down syndrome and Alzheimer's disease. He's been, you can Google him and find out. So he's number 1. At Jefferson, there's actually a group of occupational therapists. Dr. Adel, A-D-E-L, Herge, H-E-R-G-E, is a professor at the university, and she has a practice that, they've done an amazing work about Down syndrome and Alzheimer's. There's a behaviorist in California by the name of Dr. Lucy Ezralou, who's in California now, formerly at Trinitas in Elizabeth. And Dr. Lucy Ezralou is, I know she's, behaviorist is kind of key to this, because a lot of these are behavioral interventions that are so helpful. And of course, our very own Leon Murphy, right here in New Jersey. Leon actually still is at Trinitas. And, I'm sure and of course, come to our group. It's free. Right. We meet once a month. We're doing it on Zoom. Send me your email addresses. We'll send you the notifications. Pretty much all of these professionals have come onto our, we've had them all come this month, and we have more to come. There is a Dr. Ciccione up in Massachusetts. I don't have his, I think he's the one at Mass General. So, we've got them, but come to, if anybody's interested in knowing more specifically, please do. Our approach is that each month we spend an hour, and one of these folks comes on like this, and, they do amazing information sharing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jane, may we have your email address, in case people out there want to contact you for some more information? Could you repeat that, please?
Yes, of course. Jane, Jane, the usual spelling, M as in Mary, a middle initial, Boyle, Boyle, at AOL.com. And I would ask if you just put in the message, we all get a million emails, from the Down syndrome, Alzheimer's, or something like that. So, because I'll open those right away.
Great, thank you. Anything more from our panel? Okay, John, is there anyone else with their hand up?
I see no hands. I think we had a very successful event, everybody.
Thank you, Jane. It was wonderful. You were fantastic, very informative. And thank you so much for coming out tonight. And thank everybody. Oh, there's Ellen.
There's Ellen.
There you go. And thank everybody on the committee, those who were out there watching. I hope this was helpful to you. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a safe night.